Greetings, y'all. David Busby with OpenTHC. I'm going to do a little bit of a share with how we are dealing with some crap from the CCRS system in the state of Washington. So if you use OpenTHC in Washington, this is definitely for you. This is on our YouTube, and I'll be emailing everybody some notes about all this stuff. So in June 2012, 2025, we got some breaking changes in the CCRS platform. I feel like it was a little dramatic, especially since these changes came in play before anybody was even warned about it. We did not get this information. This is sudden changes. There was no notification. We've got days and days worth of error messages coming back from the CCRS platform. That is to say, as of the 12th, when we had this change come in, we were getting errors from files that we had uploaded on the 7th. Okay, so you understand that's a 5-day window. So we had uploaded stuff on the 7th with whatever rules existed on the 7th. And then on the 12th, CCRS was finally processing our files with their new rules and then giving us error messages on all of this old stuff that's happened. So now starting on the 12th, we're going to have to fix that data and then get all of that stuff reprocessed. So we've got hundreds of files that are related to inventory and hundreds of files that are related to B2B transactions that all need to get resent into the CCRS platform. Now, this platform is already overloaded, taking 5 days to respond to our information. And now here we are where we are seeing that the system is going to be taking things like, possibly even longer. Here's some. What the fuck just happened? Here we go. Let's get this timing screen back in here. Here's some details that we have about CCRS response time. This is only up to June 5th. It definitely lags, but you can see right here in the processing, this color-coded one is actually pretty nice and shows you what's going on. Variety information, section, and product. This is all critical data that has to be in the system before you can put inventory and crop information in. So you can see variety, section, product. These are taking 147 hours on average for processing these things. Inventory data, 126 hours. Crop data, 138 hours. Now, B2B outgoing stuff processes pretty quick. B2B manifests, which are required for transportation of material, are taking 90 hours, 50 hours, a long time. B2B incoming is also taking hundreds of hours to process by this system. And at the moment, because of these breaking changes, we are also sort of blocked on being able to deal with the system. So, okay, a bunch of sudden changes from CCRS regarding the way that their system behaves. Just so we're clear on how professional organizations with software handle that, they would give you some advance notice. I'll pick on Google here because everybody knows who Google is, but they recently announced a breaking change in one of their systems and said, we have a new way for you to do things, but the old way is still supported, by the way. And whenever we decide to change it, we are going to give you a 12-month window to be able to adapt to these changes that we make. That's huge. They've already got updated documentation and have announced that information to the world. They send out email notifications and things like this well in advance of making those changes. And they're also providing an upgrade window. Now, myself and some of the other software vendors have said to the LCB on more than one occasion, what professionals do is give us this information before you make a breaking change. And the LCB has had a habit of doing this stuff all the way back in the days when they were having the Leaf data. Leaf data is going to launch on December 2nd. No problemo. And then 3 days before it, they said, oh, sorry, we actually have to delay the launch by 3 months. Right at the last minute, change the whole game. So here's one of the first error messages that we're getting, and it says your inventory cost of 0. This is in total cost cannot equal 0. And we have a bit of a problem right there because, for example, if I just took some cuttings off of one of my trees, should I have a total cost of something, or is that actually 0? But what it means is until we have an accurate total cost of that inventory, we're going to have to block inventory uploads since, a 0 is not going to work out. Everybody who uses any platform will have to make sure that that total cost is in there. If you have not been keeping track of the total cost value in the traceability system in our platform, you're going to have to go through, get that stuff updated, give us a call. I can help walk you through that kind of situation. Of course, if you're looking at this and you're in the cannabis space, maybe you're a toll processor. Well, your cost of the materials was 0. You didn't have to pay to get those materials into the system. So how can you reflect that change into the system? Or what if I have inventory materials and they were samples that were given to me and I'm a retailer? Well, they would have a total cost of 0. And so that makes perfect sense. There's actually a number of occasions that makes sense for a total cost of the material to be shown in the system as 0. But right now we're blocked on all of that. So that's blocking all inventory. And because it's blocking inventory, that means it's also blocking B2B transactions. But not to worry. We'll come back to why there's a secondary problem there. Another message that's showing up is that the quantity on hand is greater than the initial quantity. So this is a bit of a problem. What if you meant to plug in like 500 grams, but you accidentally hit a 5? And then you go through the adjustment process and modify those materials to be 500. If it's a good inventory tracking system, we should keep track that the initial quantity used to be 5 and that it was fixed to 500. And then we'd have that in our system when we're pulling a report. Hey, show us everything with this discrepancy, and then let's go in and figure out why we have that discrepancy. It's exactly what you would want to do in compliance reporting. But this scenario is blocking that information, putting this stuff together. Of course, also, what if you're adjusting materials? What if you're combining materials? Lots of other operational use cases in the compliance space where the initial quantity would be a smaller number than the quantity on hand. My trivial examples, and I'm sure that there's others. Interestingly enough, about the previous error, total cost, and about this one, when the LCB deployed the CCRS platform, they said, we're not going to block bad data. We're not going to block data that doesn't match what we expect the universe to be. We're going to let that stuff flow into the system, and we're only going to generate reports about it. Well, now they've decided to suddenly change what they consider bad data and also block it from getting into the system. And interestingly enough, the cost one from the previous slide was never part of any of the original traceability data that we had, like all the way back since BioTrack and Leaf Data days. It wasn't there. It was added in on the CCRS platform, but it was not having this kind of strict enforcement until just now. And a similar use case around the quantity on hand and initial quantity, or current quantity and initial quantity. Those values didn't exist in previous platforms. They exist in this one. There wasn't any kind of strict arithmetic enforcement on them, but that's been added and now blocks data. Now on to another thing that's blocking all of our outgoing B2B transactions is you can't have a 0 medical excise tax is a new error message that we got. Let's go back to medical excise tax. Says can't be 0 on this one. And that's cool. Maybe it shouldn't be 0. And you might not have to work too hard to convince me that it can't be 0, except that on all the B2B transactions, there's no medical excise tax. It's always a 0 because the medical situation only happens on the B2C transaction. It doesn't happen on the B2B transaction. And so now we've got a system that changed, again, suddenly on the 12th, affecting data that had originally been submitted to the system on the 7th. Then the rules changed on the 12th. Now we've got stuff, as of this video on the 16th, we've got stuff that's been blocked from getting into the system for 4 days. We've got open requests out to the LCB. We've opened some requests to the service desk. We keep track of a bunch of this stuff on our GitHub. So we have added these new items into our GitHub to keep track of, you know, these issues as we're waiting for the LCB to reply to us. So here's what you can do. We filed some bugs with the LCB. Maybe you want to talk to the LCB about it. You can email examiner@lcb.wa.gov to let them know. You might want to email your enforcement officer right now and let them know these breaking changes in the system are going to be causing some kinds of issues with putting data into the system. So if they're having any issues, they might want to be, you know, get out in front of that. The LCB isn't really accountable to anybody, but the governor's office is who provides their oversight. So maybe you want to email the governor and let them know about, hey, the agency has yet again created some kind of disaster, even though they know better and have been told how to do better and have been shown how to do better. They're still choosing to not follow basic procedures that they've been told about multiple times. And maybe you can complain to the legislature, because if this data is not getting properly recorded into the CCRS platform, then all of these reports that the agency is supposed to generate for the legislature, well, that can't really happen. And I sort of want to just figure out why. You know, root cause analysis is a thing you say, ask why 5 times. Well, let's just recap real quick. Way back in the days when it was BioTrack and there was problems with the BioTrack platform, not reporting data, getting slow, etc. The LCB came out and they blamed the software integrators. They blamed the licensees for doing stuff, and then eventually started blaming the software vendor. Remember, and they broke up in a dramatic way. So then Leaf Data came in and they delayed the launch by 3 months with a last-minute announcement. Then it was launched, and it was a disaster because it was mangling people's uploaded B2B transactions. Then their source code got shared on the internet. And then the LCB, true to form, came out and blamed the integrators for the manifest problem, even though they found out it was a bug. They blamed the licensees. And then through that Leaf Data process, they kept trying to put updates in there, and it was getting worse. I don't know if anybody remembers that. But at one point in time, they decided, hey, we're going to just freeze the system with these known bugs. And we can't do it because the vendor's not good enough to be able to implement new changes without breaking stuff. A clear indicator that you have no test cases for your platform, and you lack basic software development and deployment skill sets. So CCRS got launched. They said, let's do CSV uploads. They launched it without talking to anybody ahead of time. It was a surprise. Again, not a surprise. The agency consistently behaves that way. Then we had problems with the CCRS. You'll never guess who the agency decided to blame. They decided to blame the integrators, and they decided to blame licensees for these kinds of problems. Oh, it's your fault your data's not in our broken system. Oh, you know, you have to carry a manifest with you for your transport, even though our system takes 4 or 5 days to issue this documentation. Somehow that situation is the fault of the licensees, that the CCRS platform processes slowly. Because, of course, the licensee has a whole lot of control about computers that are owned and operated by the LCB. For some reason, this agency continues to ignore the advice given to it by various agency partners. We used to have technical meetings with the agency, and we'd ask them to do things. These concepts of good software deployment and testing, robust systems, that's been shared with this agency multiple times. For some reason, they choose to ignore it. Feels like maybe they ignore it on purpose to me sometimes. And then we were chatting about this with some other integrators, and you know, they've sort of floated the idea that perhaps this agency is behaving so poorly on purpose so that this system will be basically forced to collapse, and then they can choose the vendor that they really feel like they're leaning towards, if you pay attention to who's been recently hired and to some of the RFI details that have come out from the system, right? They're hire a new director who came in from Colorado who has, a known affinity for metric. They came out with an RFI that says, hey, we got to figure out how we can have a new traceability system that supports RFID. But the LCB's budget was all locked up for deploying this new system until like 2028 or some nonsense like this. But what if we set the whole thing on fire? Now we're going to have to get a new one. Is some of the speculation that I've heard. Who even knows? But we've asked this agency and we've asked various other government officials in Washington. It's possible for the agency to run a reasonably good system. We can show them how. Other vendors can show them how. There is loads and loads of existing software that can service this problem for this agency if they just choose to stop ignoring it on purpose. So thank you for hanging out with me for a couple minutes while we learn about how CCRS is currently misbehaving.